Well, welcome to Book Sandwich Den. And this is our last book review for 2022, but we're making plans for 2023. Our book today is Odes to Common Things by Pablo Neruda, who is a Chilean poet and political activist. Our reviewers are Martha Horton and Kay Newberry. In addition to reading some of Pablo Neruda's poetry, they'll be reading other poetry as well. Kay Newberry holds a Master's of Arts degree with a concentration in poetry from Goddard College. Her poems have appeared in anthologies, including The Healing Muse, The Pitkin Review, and in her chapbook, The Way She Looks Now. Martha Horton is a Penn State journalism graduate. She's a journalist and a novelist, and recently published An Older Eye, a collection of poems with memoirs. So please welcome Martha and Kay.
Thank you. I am not a scholar of Neruda's poetry.
Yes, you are now.
Nor am I a linguist who speaks and easily communicates in Spanish. However, as a poet, lover of this natural world, and a political activist, I have been an admirer of Neruda's work. He is a poet who has seemed to belong to all of us, no matter our nationality. For this brief introduction, I am drawing from the publication People's Democracy, Weekly Organ of the Communist Party of India, Marxist, volume 28, number 32, August 8th, 2004, and the introduction to All the Odes, a bilingual edition edited by Ilan Stevens, 2013, and of course the inevitable Wikipedia resources of a non-scholar. Ricardo Naftali Reyes, 1904 to 1973, who became known as Pablo Neruda, was born into a humble background in the small town of Temuco in southern Chile, a place untouched by any social or religious conventions or so-called civilizational progress. He began writing poetry at the age of 13, free from the biases of literary schools or theories. When he left Temuco at the age of 16 to complete his studies at the University in Santiago, he was a lonely young man in the city. However, while there, he published his first collection of poems, Crepusculario, which means twilight, in 1923, and 20 poemas de amor e una canción desesperada, 20 poems of love and a song of despair, in 1924. And after that, he was launched. I use that word because it seems so appropriate to me, for this is what Neruda had to say. My poetry is my life. My poetry and my life have advanced like an American river, a torrent of Chilean water born in the hidden heart of the southern mountains, endless steering the flow of its current towards the sea. My poetry rejected nothing it could carry along in its course. It accepted passion, unraveled mystery, and worked its way into the heart of the people. I had to suffer and struggle, to love and sing. I drew my worldly share of triumphs and defeats. I tasted bread and blood. What more can a poet want? And all the choices, tears or kisses, loneliness, or the fraternity of men, survive in my poetry and are an essential part of it because I have lived for my poetry, and my poetry has nourished everything I have striven for. By 1952, Neruda was a controversial national figure because of his communist sympathies. While taking refuge on the island of Capri, he wrote The Invisible Man, which became an introduction to the 1954 Elemental Odes. The House of Odes served as an introduction to new Elemental Odes in 1956. When Neruda and his soon-to-be third wife returned to Chile by boat, he continued his life as a political activist and anti-fascist, an admirer of Lenin, and a man in sympathy with the common man. Neruda wasn't only an activist through his writing. He served as Chile's consul for 5 years in Asia and later in Spain, where he helped more than 2,000 people leave safely in 1936 during the Spanish Civil War that resulted in the dictatorship of Francisco Franco, who was there from 1939 to 1975. Just as an aside, we, United States, supported Francisco Franco. After his time in Spain, he served as a communist senator in Chile until an anti-communist was elected to the presidency and he had to go underground. During the 1970 democratic elected presidency of socialist Salvador Allende, Neruda served as Chile's ambassador to France from 1970 to 1972 and helped negotiate Chile's debts to European and American banks, returning home because of ill health. Allende's government was overthrown by a military coup led by Augusto Pinochet, and he committed suicide in 1973. Although Neruda's own death in 1973 was officially listed as heart failure due to cancer, there were those, Neruda among them, his wife and his chauffeur, who believed his death was actually the result of a shot that was given to him in his stomach and administered just 6 hours before his death, and that it was actually poison ordered by Augusto Pinochet. Neruda's funeral became a political demonstration of thousands of marchers in 2013. In 2013, after years of speculation, Neruda's body was exhumed, and in 2015, the government released a statement saying it was highly probable that Neruda's death was the result of third-party intervention. Neruda was awarded the International Peace Prize in 1950, the Lenin Peace Prize in 1953, the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1971, and an award I had never heard of before, the Golden Wreath Award in Struga, North Macedonia. And that's an award that was often given to foreign poets who were considered dissidents in their countries. It's a very prestigious award. So that's a bit about his life. And I've left out a whole lot of stuff. But I invite everybody, if you're interested, to find out more about him.
Before we read his odes, I thought it might help to discuss exactly what is an ode. An ode is a short lyric poem that extols an individual, an idea, or an event. Odes are often ceremonial in nature and may be performed publicly. Traditionally, odes are divided into 3 sections or stanzas. The strophe, consisting of 2 or more lines repeated as a unit. The antistrophe, structured in the same way, but typically offering a thematic counterbalance. And the epode, with a distinct meter and length, which summarizes the idea. There are 3 types of ode poems. Pindaric odes are named for the ancient Greek poet Pindar, who is often credited with creating the form. Pindaric odes were presented to honor the young men who triumphed in the games, and were accompanied with song and dance. The 3 sections of the ode could be performed in 3 separate areas of the amphitheater. A more recent and familiar example of a Pindaric ode is Ode on Imitations on Immortality by William Wordsworth. You may remember this from high school lit class. There was a time when meadows, grove, and stream, the earth and every common sight, to me did seem apparelled in celestial light, the glory and the freshness of a dream. Next came the Horatian ode. Horace, the great Latin poet from the time of Augustus, broke away from the strict structure of the original Greek Pindaric ode and focused on more personal, even intimate topics. This form was revived during the Renaissance and reached its epitome in the Romantic era. Keats and Shelley were masters of the Homeric ode. You'll remember a few verses from Keats' Ode on a Grecian Urn, which ponders the immortality of art. It concludes, "When old age shall this generation waste, thou shalt remain in midst of other woes than ours, a friend to man, to whom thou sayest, beauty is truth, truth beauty, that is all ye know on earth, and all ye need to know." The irregular ode is also called the Cowleyan Ode, after the English poet Abraham Cowley. Cowley wrote a series of odes he labeled as Pindaric, but he varied the length and number of lines and the meter, and sometimes dispensed with the rhyme. People at the time thought he just couldn't write a proper ode. Actually, he created a new ode form. An example of the irregular ode is Alan Tate's Ode to the Confederate Dead, written in 1928. I'll read an excerpt. "The headstones yield their names to the element. The wind whirs without recollection. In the riven troughs, the splayed leaves pile up. Of nature, the casual sacrament to the seasonal eternity of death." Contemporary odes, those we'll be reading today, are written in the irregular form. They have, in common with the earlier Pindaric and Homeric odes, the attitude of praise, contemplation, and deep emotion.
Okay, and now I'm going to talk about Mr. Neruda's idea of an ode. Neruda wrote thousands of odes, and because he was so prolific, his odes aren't consistent in their quality. Some undeveloped, others sheer propaganda. He parted from the classic ode form using short lines, sentences of simple words cut up into smaller parts with a limited amount of punctuation because he wanted his poems to be read by, in quotes, the people, who weren't educated, whose reading ability was limited. He wrote in a way that was intentionally a bit awkward, of things that could be smelled and tasted and touched. He rejected snobbery and spoke of mundane lives because they were important. They were the workers, the lovers of their country, who deserved recognition and celebration. Consequently, his odes were read and enjoyed and widely shared. The book we're featuring is today is an example of Neruda as an essentialist. He wanted these odes to be natural, confessional, and pleasurable, a rediscovery of the pleasures of life, quite different from his earlier works such as Spain in the Heart and the Heights of Machu Picchu. Right, and now we're going to read
Ode to Things.
Ode to Things. And we're going to trade back and forth because we're going to use Martha's translation for most of it. Okay.
Well, actually, Ken Kravachev's translation.
Ken Kravenhoff's
Yes,
translation.
Okay. Ode to Things. I have a crazy, crazy love of things. I like pliers and scissors. I love cups. Did we have a cup in here? Okay. Especially this one. I love cups. And rings.
And rings.
And more rings. And bowls. Not to speak, of course, of hats. The best. I love all things, not just the grandest. Also the infinitely small thimbles, spurs, plates, and flower vases.
All right. And now,
Oh, yes.
oh yes. Oh yes. The planet is sublime. It's full of pipes weaving handheld through smoke, tobacco smoke, and keys and salt shakers. Everything, I mean, that is made by the hand of men, every little thing. Shapely shoes and fabric, and each new bloodless birth of gold, eyeglasses, carpenter's nails, brushes, clocks, compasses, coins, and the softness of chairs.
Mankind has built, oh, so many perfect things. Built them of wool and of wood, of glass and of rope, remarkable tables, ships, and stairways. I love all things, not because they are passionate or sweet-smelling, but because, I don't know, because the ocean is yours and mine. These buttons and wheels and little forgotten treasures, fans upon whose feathers love has scattered its blossoms, glasses, knives, and scissors, all bear the trace of someone's fingers on their handle or surface, the trace of a distant hand lost in the depths of forgetfulness.
I pause in houses, streets, and elevators, touching things, identifying objects that I secretly covet. This one because it rings, that one because it is as soft as the softness of a woman's hip. That one there for its deep sea color, and that one for its velvet feel.
Oh, irrevocable river of things. No one can say that I loved only fish or the plants of the jungle and the field, that I loved only those things that leap and climb, desire and survive. It's not true. Many things conspired to tell me the whole story. Not only did they touch me or my hand touched them, they were so close that they were a part of my being. They were so alive with me that they lived half my life and will die half my death.
All right, now I'm going to read the translation in this book, which is by Elon Stevens, for that particular piece of poem. Oh, irrevocable river of things. It should not be said that I loved only fish, or the jungle plants in the prairie, that I not only loved what jumps, ascends, survives, sighs. It isn't true. Many things told me everything. They not only touched me, or were touched by my hand, but they accompanied my existence to such an extent that they lived with me. And they were so full of life for me that they lived with me half a life and would live with me for half a death. So, that's a different, same poem. I'm going to speak about this thing of translations because I'm pretty fascinated by this, having run into this when I was in my MFA program. I used that book when I was studying this, and I decided I don't like the way he translated. And instead of looking for another translation, I translated some of the poems of my own. And I said before, I'm not a linguist, but because the lines are simple, it does allow it. So I felt that was pretty good, and my professor said, you should have used another translation. Nevertheless, about translations, this is an interesting thing because the guy who is the editor of this one, Elon Stevens, who also translated that particular poem, says, translations are a creative process that can be varied dramatically. Some translators, believe me, some translators believe their purpose is to create an entirely new poem in the target language, while others, Elon Stevens among them, seek a balance between creativity and accuracy. In other words, a translation might not be literal, but should be unquestionably loyal. So he's more of a purist in this regard, and believing it isn't the duty of the translator to improve on the original. He's also a conservative when it comes to syntax, that even changes in punctuation should be implemented only when strictly necessary. Having the Spanish and English available face to face, as we do in both of these books, makes the reader witness to the translator's every false step, every subterfuge, every reinvention. In all the odes, the book that Stavens edited, there are 18 translators, and in this one, it's mostly Krabanov. And so in this situation where you have all these different translators, it gives the reader a chance to be a critic too. The same is true of the book we're featuring. Even though it has fewer translations, you can read it as I once did and say, I don't think that's right. But the beauty of this, once again, is the discovery. And as you see in this book, and you want to hold yours up, you can see, turn with page open page.
Oh.
So when we're talking face to face, what you see here is the English and Spanish. And in this case, it's accompanied with these lovely illustrations as well. So that's the story about translations for now. And next, Martha has devised this wonderful format that we follow. Yes. She's a specialist at this. Okay, so we read our keynote poem, and you are now going to read your ode.
Okay, here we start. Ode to the chair. One chair, alone in the jungle, in the vine's tight grip, a sacred tree groans. Other vines spiral skyward, blood-spattered creatures howl deep within the shadows. Giant leaves drop from the green sky. A snake shakes its dry rattles on its tail. A bird flashes through the foliage like an arrow aimed at a flag, while the branches shoulder their violins. Squatting on their flowers, insects prey without stirring. Our feet sink in the black weeds of the jungle sea, in clouds fallen from the forest canopy. And all I ask for the foreigner, for the despairing scout, is a seat in the sitting tree, a throne of unkept velvet, the plush of an overstuffed chair, torn up by the snaking vines. Yes, for the man who goes on foot, a chair that embraces everything, the sound, round, and the supreme dignity of repose. Get behind me, thirsty tigers and swarms of blood-sucking flies. Behind me, black morass of ghostly fronds, greasy waters, leaves the colors of rust, deathless snakes. Bring me a chair in the midst of thunder, a chair for me and for everyone, not only to relieve an exhausted body, but for every purpose and for every person, for squandered strength and for meditation. War is as vast as the shadowy jungle. A single chair is the first sign of peace. It's political again.
Yeah. So then you can see an example. This is reaching out and saying more than about chairs. And I think we're all used to that kind of thing in the way that we read anyway. If you read poetry, it's not just what you're seeing here, but what it does to the way that you think about things. So I'm going to read now a poem that is definitely one of my favorites, and it is an ode to bread. Because there's so many in here, it's... All right. This one is actually translated by Ken Krabenhoff.
Oh,
All right, ode to bread. Bread, you rise from flour, water, and fire. Dense or light, flattened or round, you duplicate the mother's rounded womb, and earth twice yearly swelling. How simple you are, bread, and how profound. You line up on the baker's powdered trays like silverware or plates or pieces of paper, and suddenly life washes over you. There's the joining of seed and fire, and you're growing all at once, like hips, mouths, breasts, mounds of earth, or people's lives. The temperature rises. You're overwhelmed by fullness, the roar of fertility, and suddenly your golden color is fixed. And when your little wombs were seeded, a brown scar laid its burn the length of your two halves. Toasted juncture, now whole, you are mankind's energy, a miracle often admired, the will to live itself. O bread familiar to every mouth, we will not kneel before you. Men do not implore unclear gods or obscure angels. We will make our own bread out of sea and soil. We will plant wheat on our earth and the planets. Bread for every mouth, for every person, our daily bread. Because we planted seed and grow it not for one man, but for all. There will be enough. There will be bread for all the peoples of the earth. And we will also share with one another whatever has the shape and the flavor of bread, the earth itself, beauty and love, all taste like bread and have its shape, the germination of wheat. Everything exists to be shared, to be freely given, to multiply. This is my bread. If you flee from mankind's houses, if they hide you away or deny you, if the greedy man pimps for you or the rich man takes you over, if the wheat does not yearn for the furrow and the soil, then bread, we will refuse to pray. Bread, we will refuse to beg. We will fight for you instead. Side by side with the others, with everyone who knows hunger, we will go after you in every river and in the air. We will divide the entire earth among ourselves so that you may germinate and the earth will go forward with us. Water, fire, and mankind fighting at our side. Crowned with sheaves of wheat, we will win earth and bread for everyone, and then life itself will have the shape of bread, deep and simple, immeasurable and pure. Every living thing will have its share of soil and life, and the bread we eat each morning, everyone's daily bread, will be hallowed and sacred, because it will have been won by the longest and costliest of human struggles. This earthly victory does not have wings. She wears bread on her shoulders instead. Courageously, she soars, setting the world free, like a baker borne aloft on the wind. Okay. And now,
In contrast to the ode Kay just read, I'm going to read a contemporary ode to bread. It's not labeled as such, but I think it qualifies because it has that attitude of praise and contemplation and some emotion. It's by Linda Paston, who's from Potomac, Maryland, and she has written, I think it says a dozen books and won a number of prestigious prizes. Bread. It seems to be the 5 stages of yeast, not grief, that you like to write about, my son says, meaning that bread is always rising and falling, being broken and eaten in my poems. And though he is only half serious, I want to say to him, bread rising in the bowl is like breath rising in the body. Or, if you knead the dough with perfect tenderness, it's like gently kneading flesh when you make love. Baguette, pita, pani, challah, naan. Bread is the universal language, translatable on the famished tongue. Now it is time to open the package of yeast and moisten it with water, watching for its fizz, its blind energy, proofing it's called, the animate proof of life. Everything is ready, salt, flour, oil. Breadcrumbs are what lead the children home. And bread requires butter. I think a lot of you are probably familiar with the work of Barbara Crooker, who lives over the border in Pennsylvania. She taught at Elmira College, Corning Community, Tompkins Cortland. She became an adjunct professor at Colgate, Cedar Crest College. And she's won awards too numerous to mention. Many of her poems, I think, are odes, at least in spirit. So I'll deal with butter here.
What's the name of that book?
This particular book is Some Glad Morning, Barbara Cooker. I just love her stuff. I don't find it right. Oh. Okay, butter. Kneeling on green grass beside the still blue water, an Indian maiden, or should I say Native American woman, or first person, holds out a yellow box of butter as if it were treasure. And she's also on the box, which turns her into one of those endlessly repeating images in a convex mirror, beloved by Renaissance painters. Behind her, there's a large red O, the sun also rising. Even the sky is pale yellow, thick as Irish cream. In this, the age of low-fat cholesterol watching, butter has been shunned. We've forgotten the pleasure of a single pat turning liquid, a golden lake atop a small hill of mashed potatoes. Lunchtime, isn't it? The gilding of a slice of raisin toast, or the slow sinking into the crevices of a Thomas's muffin. During the war, butter was rationed. My mother bought oleomargarine, which came in white blocks. We helped her knead the dot of red dye, which restored it to its dariness. Let us imagine it might have come from a cow, not a chemist. Now we live in a time of plenty, where supermarkets are fully stocked and can't imagine lining up for hours only to find that there's nothing left. That no matter how many dollars you have, it's not enough. There's nothing to buy. And yet we know, or should know, what's coming as we ignore the warnings about climate change, drowned cities, crop failures, scarcities. Somewhere in the future, a small girl will unearth this box as she sifts through garbage looking for treasure. She will sound out the word with something like wonder. She will ponder sweet, cream, salted. Try to imagine the taste, something rare and wonderful from the world that disappeared. What's also disappeared is the lovely Native American lady from the box. I wanted to bring one in here and hold it up, but there's no Native American young lady on the box anymore, which is another sign of our times, I guess.
What year was that published?
Let's see. It's even signed, let's see. 2019, I guess the war is still the Second World War in a lot of people's minds. Mine certainly. Does anyone remember crunching the red capsules into the white book? And just because it's here and it's short, and it's certainly an ode to another common thing, Barbara Cooker's saltines. Something I associate with childhood illness, stale Coca-Cola or ginger ale, a crispy white flatness, a brisk nip of salt, endless television in a household that usually rationed it. Or on better days, crackers meant to be broken into confetti, decorating the warm bath of tomato soup, while the snow poured down in shattered flakes. How little we knew about what was ahead, life's little joys and sorrows, packaged in cellophane, waiting. But here was comfort, white and predictable, every square identical, wrapped up tight, slotted into the blue and white box. My mother at the stove stirring, the dark waiting outside and the snow falling.
We love that.
Everything she writes.
Yes. We, obviously, these are without needing translation because we're all English speakers, and I think they would do well. And you can see the similarity, for instance, with Neruda not so much political as a reminiscence here, saying something about time and time passing, but definitely that sense of tactile and taste. And it just, I'm sure any one of us who ever had tomato soup at lunchtime, which for me was a couple days ago, can relate to that poem in that way. And now we also have an extraordinary experience in this country of having a poet who really uses the form of ode as a political thing. I mean, she writes other poetry, but I'm sure you're all familiar with Amanda Gorman, who was the keynote speaker at Barack Obama's inauguration, the second one. And her most recent ode was one that she addressed to the UN General Assembly in September 2022. So I'm going to read this, and what you'll see, and I'm sure having heard her, you know this, is that she is speaking in the language of young people, and it's very much often a rap rhythm. And the language just is phenomenally appealing, and there's a movement to it as well. How can I ask you to do good when we barely withstood our greatest threats yet? The depths of death, despair and disparity, atrocities across cities, towns, and countries, lives lost, climactic costs, exhausted, angered, we are endangered, not because of our numbers, but because of our numbness. We're strangers to one another's perils and pain, unaware that the welfare of the public and the planet share a name, equality. Doesn't mean being the exact same, but enacting a vast aim, the good of the world to its highest capability. The wise believe that our people without power leaves our planet without possibility. Therefore, though poverty is a poor existence, complicity is a poor excuse. We must go the distance. Though this battle is hard and huge, though this fight we did not choose, for preserving the earth isn't a battle too large to win, but a blessing too large to lose. This is the most pressing truth, that our people have only one planet to call home, and our planet has only one people to call its own. We can either divide and be conquered by the few, or we can decide to conquer the future. And say that today, a new dawn, we wrote, say that as long as we have humanity, we will forever have hope. Together, we won't just be the generation that tries, but the generation that triumphs. Let us see a legacy where tomorrow is not driven by the human condition, but by our human conviction. And while hope alone can't save us now, with it we can be brave. We can brave the now, because our hardest change hinges on our darkest challenges. This may our crisis be our cry, our crossroad, the oldest ode we owe each other. We chime it for the climate. For our communities, we shall respect and protect every part of this planet, hand it to every heart on this earth, until no one's worth is rendered by the race, gender, class, or identity they were born. This morn, let it be sworn that we are one human kin, grounded not just by the griefs we bear, but by the good we begin. To anyone out there, I only ask that you care before it's too late, that you live aware and awake, that you lead with love in hours of hate. I challenge you to heed this call. I dare you to shape our fate. She's pretty something, isn't she? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was sitting down here and I was thinking how short I was, and then I was thinking, she's in that. Is she? And she's big. She's really big. Oh yeah, she's. I didn't know she was that person that goes to show. Yeah, she's extraordinary. So this is one of the pleasures of seeing this form of ode once again becoming very political. And I think actually during the periods of Wordsworth and Shelley folks were writing too, they were political. It was a different period of time, and it was a different kind of revolution going on. But to think that somehow we are living in a unique period of time where this is all politics and this is all shift and change, as we all know if we've lived long enough and seen enough, this is not new. What's new is the fact that it's so hard to gather people together because of the communities have changed. So anyway, Amanda Gorman, she's stunning.
Back to Neruda.
Yes,
Or we-
I think you're back to your favorite ode.
Well, I don't know that I have a favorite, but I like this one.
Okay.
Ode to a bar of soap. When I pick up the bar of soap to take a closer look, its powerful aroma astounds me. Oh, fragrance. I don't know where you came from. What is your hometown? Did my cousin send you, or did you come from clean clothes and the hands that washed them, splotchy from the cold basin? Did you come from those lilacs I remember so well, from the amaranth's blossom, from green plums clinging to a branch? Have you come from the playing field and a quick swim beneath trembling willows? Is yours the aroma of thickets, or of young love, or birthday cakes? Or is yours the smell of a dampened heart? What is it that you bring to my nose so early every day, bar of soap, before I climb into my morning bath and go into the streets among men weighed down with goods? What is this smell of people, a faint smell of petticoat flowers, honey of woodland girls? Or is it the cold, half-forgotten air of a 5 and 10, the heavy white fabric a peasant holds in his hands, rich thickness of molasses, or the red carnation that lay on my aunt's sideboard like a lightning bolt of red, like a red arrow? Do I detect your pungent odor in cut-rate dry goods and unforgettable cologne in barber shops and the clean countryside in sweet water? This is what you are, so you are pure delight, the passing fragrance that slithers and sinks like a blind fish to the bottom of the bathtub.
I'm going to read my favorite ode. Actually, I have a lot of favorite odes, but this one is one that I think is pretty cool. And it also allowed us to use another prop, which is always fun. Okay. This is page 43, and it's Ode to the Apple. And this is another one that Elon Stevens translated. You, apple, I want to celebrate you by filling my mouth with your name, by eating you. You're always new like nothing else, and or no one, always as if just fallen from paradise, plentiful and pristine, reddened cheek of aurora. How unappealing are the fruits of earth compared to you, the grainy grapes, the gloomy mangoes, the seedy plums, the submissive figs. You are pure ointment, fragrant bread, cheese of vegetation. When we bite into your rounded innocence, for an instant we return to being newly created creatures again. Somehow we remain apple. I want a total abundance, the multiplication of your family. I want a city, a republic, a Mississippi river of apples. And on its shore, I want to see the entire population of the world united, reunited in the simplest act on earth, biting an apple. That's that. And you, by the way, are welcome to have some apples. The ones, the reddest ones on top are empires, and there's sort of a joke in that because I can't imagine Neruda thinking, you know, like, anyway, empires, which happen to be the apples that grow in Nick's in my front yard, and yet this year we didn't have any. It was a rough year for apples. The others that are colorful are ones called Sweet Tango. And I got those because I thought it was like South American dance.
They're very good.
So you're welcome to have an apple. And if there are any comments, we welcome them, right? Yes.
When I was in Santiago, I visited Pablo Neruda's house,
Oh,
which was absolutely fascinating. Well, Santiago is all hills by the sea. So I remember walking up many, 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 many steps to get up to his house that was up on a hill. And along the way, there were all kinds of like murals, I guess political, or they were very, very colorful. And the house was fascinating. The part where he lived, we learned a lot about his communist leanings and his writings, and he was very controversial. And the controversy about his death, which was there before they declared maybe he was poisoned. And the other thing I remember about the house was that there was a lot of artwork, and a lot of it had to do with the sea. There were boats, and there was, just everything about the sea, and all kinds of artwork, and beautiful view from the absolutely fascinating. So I've been fascinated with him ever since. His writing and acting, which I love.
There's a story that, that was mentioned in this book, that when the police came because of to his home, he said, "Go ahead, there's nothing dangerous in here but poetry." Any other comments? Yes.
Yeah, in high school, we read the Ode to a Grecian Urn. What was that supposed to get out of there? I can't remember now. That's a good question. The paintings on a Grecian urn. Ode to a Grecian urn.
Yes.
yeah, I love that one. Some of them, Kate just reread some Shelley.
Yes.
Boring.
No, well, it's true. I mean, there is a thing about period poetry. And as a person who, I've read Shelley, and I've also got a couple of lines that are favorite, but I can't, at this point in my life, I have to say it. Although I will spend time reading endlessly, I have no patience for a particular form that just begins to, I can't quite relate to that. So it's a matter of, all of us. I think for anybody who is studying literature or period or form, it's really important to be able to at least introduce that to yourself. But I wouldn't say to everybody, like, you've never read Shelley, go out and read Shelley and say, well,
But you should go out and read Ode to a Grecian Urn.
Yes, you
That
should.
one, I think, is
I know at the
special.
Corning Glass Center, they have urns with,
Yes.
2,000 years ago or more, with paintings and
That has real meaning.
Yes, yes, indeed. Has anyone heard any of the other things recently about Neruda besides his controversy? And I will say again that in both South America and in Spain, as far as I'm concerned, the United States was on the wrong side. We were on the side of the dictator. And when Allende was democratically elected in Chile, the United States was against it. And we supported Pinochet, who was definitely a tyrant and caused a lot of harm. It's a matter of often our political interests being more important. But I'm going to get to something even more delicate at this point. There is, in 2018, with the rise of the Me Too movement in Santiago, people who are in academia and women especially who are in academia, who are feminists, are looking at Neruda's work and they're questioning it. Because in his memoirs, he did write quite honestly about the fact that he raped a woman in 1930 when he was in Sri Lanka as a consul. And he says in his memoir, she had every right to despise me. We wouldn't know that if it weren't for the fact that Neruda told this about himself, which is pretty much typical of Neruda, who was very, very open and saying, in fact, let me find the title of his memoir, and you'll see why it might have been included. This is the kind of thing most people would just try to, you don't know it, you're not going to find out about it. But he did tell about it. And the title of his memoir, excuse me, I don't keep notes as neatly as mine. Okay. Well, I said I was going to do that, and I can't find it. But I do want to tell you that that news is out there. If you are interested in finding out more about it, please check it out. I do have this to say about this. Personally, that's reprehensible. It's nothing that makes him admirable. There's nothing even admirable about the fact that he confessed to it. But the other part of this is, for me, I would never look to a creative artist as being my spiritual guide or my ideal being. That's a totally different thing. And yes, people should certainly call him to account for that and take that into consideration as far as I'm concerned. But at the same time, if someone used that as the reason never to read Neruda, or, for instance, never looked at the paintings of Pablo Picasso because of what we know about Picasso, or name it, make a list of all the artists and writers, etc., that we could make, and say, they're so bad, we will not teach it, we will not speak of it. I think it's important as a teacher, and as somebody who really loves literature, that we put these things in context and say, and in this case, we can't say, well, that happened all the time in those days. There's nothing that allows that particular act to be okay. It's not like so-and-so is a racist because people were racist at that time, which is bad, but it's at the same time, it doesn't mean that every word that comes out of that person's mouth is completely something you shouldn't know about. So, yeah, when I read that, I thought, oh, bummer. And it's coming right when we're doing this, and I didn't want to bring it at the beginning because I didn't want it to be the kind of thing where that's what you were thinking about as I was reading something about something else. So his references in here, and we talk in his memoirs, is This Is My Life, and he spoke very openly about what it was. In fact, he wrote his memoir, it was published posthumously in about 1974. He died in 1973, and he included everything that happened right up to right before his death, and he continued to write. So here's a man who wrote for 55 years out of a 69-year-old life. It's pretty astounding. That's Pablo for today.
You know, I was raised a Catholic, and we had confession. You would go to the priest, and you admit what you did wrong, and there was absolution. So there's got to be absolution beyond the church. So he admitted he did something wrong, and I think he felt out of it. And I see nothing wrong with saying, okay, you were sorry, I give you absolution.
No, because the irony there would be that he was born into and raised in a culture that would have been heavily Catholic. Grew up and embraced communism, which rejects organized religion. So I would sooner think at that point in his life, he was owning the fact that, I was a stupid kid in 1930 because he would have been very young and every bit capable of the machismo that I grew up with.
He doesn't, go ahead.
I would sooner ascribe maybe his need to confess to the fact that by the time he gotten older, at least he knew he didn't have to pretend that he was perfect or anything. You know, don't beat me into something that I'm not. But again, as far as absolution, because one confesses to a priest, he would have presumably, as a communist, and I heard a lot of communists when that longest oath.
No, he wasn't,
He would not have embraced.
you were talking about it philosophically, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, with Neruda, this was 1930, he was in Asia
Sri Lanka.
on his own, and it was very isolating for 5 years, and his behavior was completely reprehensible. He didn't make a habit of, now I'm going to go out and do this over and over again. It was just, he says in the memoir, the quote was that it was this overwhelming thing, and he just acted on it. So none of it excuses any of it, but at the same time, as I said, I'm looking at Neruda's poetry, and I will not read his poetry keeping this in mind as if everything that he writes about is an allusion to neurotic or whatever, somehow makes him questionable as a poet, or that somehow it relates to this kind of behavior. But I'm sure he had other faults, and as we all do, and so he wasn't going to be a clean slate as any of us who've lived, and especially somebody who was such an adventurer.
Going back to Shelley and his famous odes, we still read Shelley, but we know his life.
Yes, or Byron as well.
It wasn't Byron.
Yeah.
They were bad boys.
Well, so, yes.
Just a couple of quick questions, if I may. Actually, a couple of comments and a question. One is, I love what you read in the ode about the apples and whatever, and how basically they're the perfect fruit, and all the other stuff that comes up there, way down there. Just this morning, it's funny because I happened to be at the food bank working this morning, and I went in thinking that our shift was going to do one thing. We wound up instead sorting potatoes that had been donated in bulk right from the fields at Cornell. And I thought, ooh, the writer should have seen the potatoes. So that was the first thing, and I thought the way they described the perfection of the apple was spot on. The other thing, the question, when you categorize odes in 3 categories, the Greek and then the Roman, the English one, did you say the name, is it Cowley or Cowley?
Cowley.
I love that because my mother's maiden name is Cowley.
Oh, really?
And they would love to know if there was any way at all that they were connected to someone who was kind of a scamp in the literary world.
He was an interesting person.
Irregular. I know a
Yeah,
couple
irregular
Of her,
like his odes.
I know a couple of her relatives who would love that one.
Wonderful.
Anything
I was
else?
looking up to see if he had an ode to potatoes.
I'm sure the potatoes.
Because I might write one if he didn't.
They're just pasta.
Just had potato pancakes at Charlie's Cafe. Oh. Oh, there's no, oh, here to a potato we might have.
Okay, there isn't, okay.
Well, thank you very much. And keep your eyes on the schedule for the library website so that you'll know when we start our winter, spring book reviews. So hope to see you there. Thank you again.